You read the Hebrew Bible and the Greek myths. Well, for certain, and others I think are get this impression that you're kind of reading the same myth over and over again. And let's take the patriarchs of the Greek and Hebrew religions, for example, Perseus and Abraham. So if we equate them, but also at the same time we say that there's kind of these parallel figures, right, or analogous figures, this Moses and Agamemnon, right, these pairs of Greek and Hebrew, and then we could say Jacob and Heracles are the same. And they also have kind of this, well, they're parallel, but they also kind of repeat, or they have this kind of like fractal nature to them, right, where they're not quite all the way repeating, but maybe like in less scale, right? So you say Perseus is kind of like a smaller role or something, or Abraham is not as well attested as Moses, right? But he still has the same overall shape. And if we zoomed in on Abraham or Perseus, we would see the same. And I think if we understand that, we can make some huge strides in just understanding general mythology of the Bronze Age, right, in the early Iron Age, and maybe even before to the Neolithic. So we can say Perseus and Abraham are the patriarchs of their respective pantheons, right? That every kind of myth flows from them, and that would make sense because they're both descendant from God, right? And we understand them kind of as, well, they have a covenant with God, or they quite literally are descendant from God. So Perseus, of course, is the patriarch of the Mycenaean Greece culture. And then Abraham is that of Judaism. And then you go further into Christianity and, of course, Islam. And then Perseus, well, he's described in both the Homeric and the Hesiodic tradition. And then, of course, Ovid, right, in the Metamorphosis. I think it's like a whole book. He probably gives the most detailed version. And then, so like I said, if you zoom in on these people, you'll see the same shape. But if just standing, from the same scale as, say, Heracles, right? If you just read theogony, you'll say, oh, it's all about Heracles and stuff. And I'll say that's true. Yes, you can't tell the Greek myths without understanding who Heracles is. Just like the Jewish myths, you can't understand them without understanding who Jacob is. But so I'm saying, like, if you just read theogony, you probably wouldn't. It wouldn't seem though that Perseus is the same as Abraham, though, right? Because Perseus he's only mentioned twice, but Abraham, yeah, he has like 10 or 12 whole books or chapters devoted to him, right? So, but I think that's the fact that a lot is lost in translation, right? If you go and you read the Greek, or maybe if you read Latin, it would make more sense, right? You would say, oh, okay, this is how he's like Abraham. And then, so I've also said this before, that Perseus is like Abraham. So I just really want to articulate my claim, and I don't think anyone's gonna. Well, I don't think anyone can really make an argument against, right? Because that's why nobody has really made any arguments against, like, anything Mark has said, right? They've just kind of tried to discredit him through childish stuff, but nobody is really. When I say evidence, you can't really go and read anything in the text that's going to say, oh, this is wrong or something, right? If anything, the Jewish myths agree. They just are going to be in a different direction. There's going to be like the negative direction or something, the opposite, or they're going to be like reflected across a mirror or something. And of course, the evidence means analyzing the text. So if you're like, well, all the religion comes from text. If you're a Christian, you understand this through logos. So, like, if you read theogony, you might. So if you can go and read theogony, but we could also read like Apollodorus, right? So Apollodorus gives a really good detailed account on the life of Perseus as well. But I think I don't know, I like Hesiod. He's probably the best and the easiest because it's so short and it's like to the point. It's not really, well, Homer's kind of a mess, right? Homer's a mess. It's like, why would you want to read that when you could just read something in like an hour or two? So with Perseus, perhaps we can say, like, a lot of people want to make this leap, but I do too. I mean, I think it's pretty logical that Perseus is like Persian, or maybe he's Aryan, right? Because they were Aryans and they were Medians and then Persians. And, well, just in general, we can call him the Persian influence in Greece, right? Because, I don't know. I mean, Hesiod comes from the eastern part of the Aegean, so I mean, he might himself have come from Persia at some point, come from that area, right? He just understood the Eastern myths just through his family tradition. And we can say maybe that like Perseus is, I don't know. I don't really know. I don't really know I don't really know much about the Persian religion except for there's figures like Zoroaster, right? And then Zoroaster, there's a Zoar in Genesis, and maybe we can say they're like Lot, or we can say that Zoroaster is kind of like Abraham or something. Another figure, Diodorus of Sicily. And then I like his books because he's way more realistic, right? He separates the myth from like reality, or what he's trying to describe as reality. And then I think he gives like a good account of, well, he gives an account of Egypt, and then he gives an account of the Jewish people and their myths. And he talks about Moses, right, and how Moses went from Egypt to the Levant, where his ancestors founded Israel. But of course, well, the myth itself spreads through diffusion, right? So it's not like all these myths are the same through coincidence. It's because people travel and they trade myths and stuff. So it wasn't just Moses, right? I mean, he has relatives, and some of those Hebrews came to Greece, and it's like, well, he talks about Diodorus. He says notably like Cadmus, and then Danaus, right? We know the Danaids. So if you read from Diodorus of Sicily in his book, book 40, so he says, since we are about to give an account of the war against the Jews, we consider it appropriate before we proceed further in the first place to relate the origin of this nation and their customs. In ancient times, a great plague occurred in Egypt, and many ascribed the cause of it to the gods who were offended with them. For since the multitudes of strangers of different nationalities who lived there made use of their foreign rites and religious ceremonies and sacrifices, the ancient manner of worshipping the gods practiced by the ancestors of the Egyptians had been quite lost and forgotten. Therefore, the native inhabitants concluded that unless all the foreigners were driven out, they would never be free from their miseries. All the foreigners were forthright expelled, and the most valiant and noble among them, under some notable leaders, were brought to Greece. In other places, as some relate, the most famous of their leaders were Danaus and Cadmus, but the majority of the people descended into a country not far from Egypt, which is now called Judea, and at that time was altogether uninhabited. The leader of this colony was one Moses, a very wise and valiant man, who, after he had possessed himself of the country amongst other cities, built that now most famous city, Jerusalem, and the temple there, which is so greatly revered among them. So it seems like, well, there may be some life or historicity to the Bible, as well as the Mycenaean Greek culture, right? That we famously read about, right? That, well, we know about Cadmus, and then there's probably we can make the assumption that Danaus, right? And then an easy assumption to make would be that Danaus, or the Danaids, right, they're analogous to the tribe of Dan in the Hebrew mythology. So maybe we can relate the tribe of Dan to Hera. Or we could say, well, like again, I say there's kind of a repeating nature to the myth. So just to take their names, right, just to look at their names. So Hera, just from the naming, is probably like Leah. So the Hebrew Leah, who Leah is Jacob's wife, is like the Greek Hera again. So where Hera, she's described as cow-eyed, and Leah in Hebrew means like a wild cow, but then again, Leah can also be called wearied. And that's interesting because Athena, well, she has the epithet of unwearied, right? She's unwearied. But it could be that the A, right, the Aleph in Athena makes her unwearied. And then likewise with Levi, it's like this, well, it's just like this transformation, right, of the root word from Leah, the tired, wandering cow, this kind of loose end. And then you get the Levi, right, from Leah, and where Levi means to join, right? It means to probably be unwearied, like not this loose end or wandering cow. You're kind of corralled. And then, right, and then likewise, Athena is that, she's that corralling with the Aleph, the A on the front. And this represents, again, the joined version, this unwearied entity. And then we can say that the tribe of Dan, well, perhaps the tribe of Dan is like Aphrodite, right? Or that perhaps Dinah in Genesis is like Aphrodite. And that Dan, to be judged, again, is like Aphrodite. And that in the play by Aeschylus, right? well, it's somewhat ambiguous. Where, from what I recall when I read it, that it describes, wait, where does the cow? That's the whole point. It's like, where? How could this person be from Greek and then come from Egypt, or from all over, and then even like Ionian, but still be Greek, right? It makes no sense. That's what he's trying to figure out. And then it's a cow, and then it describes the cow going loose that we associate with Hera. This, once again, the cow-eyed. But just the way, well, again, Aeschylus says that she comes from this Ionian goddess, right? Io means Ionian, and then she comes originally from Greece, and then she's also like in Egypt, I think also the Middle East and Syria and stuff. And it's probably like Aphrodite, right? That we understand her, that she comes from Ishtar or Inanna. And it's also Aphrodite that's judged in the Iliad, right? Because it's, well, she is kind of reduced from her warrior princess role, or she becomes just kind of this sex symbol or love goddess. And then it's Athena who's given the role of war goddess, right? That Aphrodite, or Dina's one that's judged. Nevertheless, we can still make sense of the myths, right? Because even if it's somewhat confusing and we can't 100% say for sure, the Greeks were not straight on their gods and goddesses as well, right? Because with Athena and Hephaestus, well, depending on who you ask, they're born asexually or they're not, right? They're born without means. And again, that's on what version you read. So this isn't a matter we're going to prove for all eternity. You just kind of have to make your point, and then people, well, the best points are the ones that make the most sense, right? In the sense that what happens over time is that people just figure out what is the best and what makes sense. That no theory is 100% accurate. It's just accurate to such like so many figures, right? So many decimal places that the probability that you would do that it would make any significant difference, it's like totally negligent. It would never even come into question. So at that point you'd be splitting hairs. So best to just read the gods as just words, right? They're just abstractions, and not get bogged down on them being, well, we have a lot of preconceived notions about them, about their responsibilities and what they mean. So if you just understand them as words, right, and what they mean literally. So Athena literally means like an atheist, or when they say she's unwearied, they mean she's unwearied, right? Whatever that word is, just think about what it means, and then you could substitute it into, well, if it's used in the Hebrew myths, you can understand that you're probably talking about Athena or something, or it's this kind of transformation of the language. And likewise, when reading the Bible, right, Moses isn't Moses. He's not this old guy. He literally means to like draw out the water, right? He's drawing out the water. And that's how I'd like to interpret Perseus and Abraham, right? When reading and comparing Hesiod and Genesis, that we're really going to just understand them. Well, it's helpful. I don't speak Hebrew, so I don't even try to read that. And I feel like you're going to unleash some curses if you start talking in Hebrew. It's like if you go in front of a mirror and say Bloody Mary, like you're gonna unleash demons on you. But if you do read the Greek, because if you speak English or any type of other language like Spanish or Italian or French, you even probably German. I mean, some Germans were probably some of the best translators of Greek and these other ancient languages. So I think Greek is probably the key way to get in there, because we all have a sense of the language. We still use the language today. The story of Abraham starts off with him, Sarah, his nephew Lot, and then Lot's wife. And then they all of them live with this guy, Terah, in Ur, which most people think is in the modern country of Iraq, right? We understand Iraq near the ancient city of Babylon. So it's called Chaldean Ur, where the Chaldeans were a people, well, they spoke a Western Semitic dialogue, right? They were Western Semites. So I'll read from Wikipedia about the Chaldeans. So unlike the East Semitic Akkadian-speaking Akkadians, Assyrians and Babylonians, whose ancestors had been established in Mesopotamia Since at least the 30th century BCE, the Chaldeans were not a native Mesopotamian people, but were late 10th or early 9th century BCE West Semitic Levantine migrants to the southeastern corner of the region, who had played no part in the previous 3,000 years or so of the Sumero, Akkadian, and Assyro-Babylonian Mesopotamian civilization and history. The ancient Chaldeans seem to have migrated into Mesopotamia sometime between 940 to 860 BCE, a century or so after the new Semitic arrivals, the Aramaeans and the Suteans, who appeared in Babylonia around 1100 BCE. So, yeah, it's pretty interesting. And then I think when we read Genesis, but also theogony, it'll make more sense. So, back to Genesis. So, Terah, the old guy they were living with, dies. And then the Lord appears to Abraham in Genesis 12, and this is how we get to know Abraham. So Abraham, he was called Abram at that point. So Abram departed as the Lord had directed him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran, and Abram took his wife Sarah, whose nephew Lot, and all the possessions and people they had acquired in Haran, and set out for the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram traveled to the land as far as the site of the oak of Moreh at Shechem, and at that time the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, I will give this land to your offspring. So Abram built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there Abram went on to the hill country east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel to the west and Ai to the east. There he built an altar to the Lord, and he called on the name of the Lord. Most already know that Perseus kills Medusa, the Gorgon, who is a snake-headed, she's a mortal. And if you just read the English translation of Hesiod, you'll say, yes, that's all that's going on. But there's much more going on. There might seem to be a problem with Perseus being, he's only named twice in theogony, right? And then comparing to Abraham, he has 12 whole chapters in Genesis. You just have to really flesh it out. So, and it's kind of the same with Abraham as well, right? The more you read about him, the more you'll understand. So let's read Hesiod. Hesiod's theogony. And again, Cato bore to Forces the fair cheek grace, sisters gray from their birth, and both deathless gods and men who walk on earth call them grays. Penfredo, well clad in saffron robe, Enyo, and the Gorgons who dwell beyond glorious ocean, in the frontier land towards night, where are the cleared voice Hesperides, Stheno, and Euryale, and Medusa, who suffered a woeful fate. So from that reading, Cato, it's like a sea monster. So perhaps, like the myths of Heracles, the one who's guarding the limits of the known world, that the Heraclean Gates, they stand at the border of Western Europe and the Atlantic Ocean, and there's a lot of symbolism there. The sisters, the gray ones, are, as their name suggests, they're gray, or what they call polios. So they could be like these polished stones or this altar, right? Because we know Jacob, he oils the rock after his dream. And we also know that Abraham, he has like this, he's visited by the Lord, right? And he makes this altar, right? It's just kind of like Jacob. And I think they both happen at Bethlehem or Bethel. And then we also know, right, the main story of Medusa is that she turns people to stone, right? She can make people turn to stone forever, right? And that could be like polishing or anointing a stone with oil, right, to make it last forever so it doesn't corrode. And then the silver from birth, once again, it indicates they're stone. They're immortal, but Medusa is mortal, right? You have to mediate. You have to anoint the stone over and over again, or else it's going to start to corrode, right? And that's a religious kind of thing. It's a covenant with God. It doesn't end. So I see the metaphor of turning to stone as also this kind of neurological paralysis, right? It's like an allegory for eating a bad bug or getting bit by a snake, or maybe like you get stung by this poisonous jellyfish or something. So basically it's a cataloging of what's safe to eat in the ocean, or this vast expanse that these pirates or these Western Semitic people how they lived, right? They lived in the ocean, right? The Mediterranean Sea and then Mesopotamia, and they traveled around to Egypt and all over. And that's how the religion or these myths spread. So Gorgon, well, I think Gorgon, well, it can mean gorgeous, right? Because Medusa was known as being gorgeous or being very pretty before she was changed into this snake-headed goddess in some myths, right? But if you just literally look at the translation, it means like non-selling, right? Agora, selling, or a market, and then you take off the A. It's kind of like this, well, it's like this non-selling, right? Or maybe it just means like this unmarketable corner, a black market, or any identified commodity that the state hasn't formally brought into legal existence, right? Through these kind of religious, how we know through religious text or whatever, but at that time they were legal, right? We lived in a theocracy. Hesiod uses the word paralego or paralizato or paralicato. So it's like to lie down with, right? Just say para, if lego is like to lie. It's like almost like parallel or to paraly, to lie with. But it also means to have sex, right? And, well, it just means to not be able to get back up, basically. To lie, paralyze someone, right? And then if you use the Perseus word study tool online, the Tufts EDU website, they have a translation that the word could mean pluck out a superfluous hair, which is kind of like an extremely specific and odd translation. But I guess you could go with it, and you could say it's like to move a stinger or some kind of poisonous barb or something from a fish or something in the ocean, maybe, or just in wildlife in general. Right, because we know one of the Grey sisters is called Pemphiredon. And then, well, Pemphiredon is this kind of specific translation. It's like it's a buzzing noise, but it's more like a wasp, and more particular, it's a type of wasp, right, that nest, they say, in oak trees. And then, well, yeah, it makes sense that if it's well clad, so we know like a wasp or something has like this exoskeleton, right? They actually look, well, they look pretty cool, wasps, when they fly around. They got these, well, they got like armor almost, and they've been segmented, right? We know an insect it's cut into segments. And then the other sister is called Enyo, which is like dread, or this visual dread that you're seeing a destruction, right? Like Sodom and Gomorrah, you see the destruction. And then Apollo, in his version, has the sisters. Well, they have the eye and tooth right together, just to share amongst them. And then Perseus comes along and he takes the eye and the tooth from them, and then he makes his sisters help them in exchange for the tooth and eye back. Right? He makes them cut a deal. So let's read from the Bibliotheca of Apollodorus, Book 2, Chapter 4, Section 2. The three had but one eye and one tooth, and these they passed to each other in turn. Perseus got possession of the eye and the tooth, and when they asked them back, he said he would give them up if they showed him the way to the nymphs. Now these nymphs had winged sandals and the cabissus, which they say was a wallet, but Pindar and Hesiod and the shield say of Perseus, but all his back had on the head of a dread monster, the Gorgon, and round him ran the cabissus. The cabissus is also so called because dress and food are deposited in it. It could be a wallet, right? Do we understand? Well, do we understand that Perseus, he's a patriarch, and his line eventually is going to give rise to people like Hermes and Odysseus, right? And these are going to be gods that we know they use animal skins. They're associated with animal skins, right? That Hermes himself, Derma, comes from Herma, right? The ERMA and Derma comes from Hermes, and that he is this kind of skin or something that can be dried out, probably, that a scribe would use, or a shepherd god, right? That we know him as the shepherd god, and that you get animal skins from shepherding animals, leather, and you also get bladders and other kind of intestinal organs that their tissue can be used to make like water skins, and then again, this water encompassing the water, this is going to be like a perimeter for the water, this boundary to hold the water in, right? That he says that water or food is deposited in it, the cabyssus. It's like a stomach, right? And then in regards to Genesis, right, we could say cabyssus is like Lot. Lot is Abraham's nephew, but Lot is also associated with possessions, right? That allows him to carry with him. That Abraham, it always says that he carries possessions with him, or he doesn't want the possessions, right? Or that Lot is in the city, and then he rescues Lot, right? And then we can just say that allows him to carry food for travel over distances. And then also recall in Leviticus, it mentions what kind of insects and shellfish and meat you can eat. Maybe meat you can eat. Maybe we can say the Pantheon it's like a tooth, right? That he's well clad. And then he's also, well, just looking at the name, he's segmented like this tetrahedron. But there's also the ending to his name. Pantheon is hedon, right? He's a hedon, as in hedonistic. Maybe that he ate bugs, right? I mean, look at the Bible says you can eat some bugs, right? It says you can eat bugs. So the bug people might be right to some extent, right? There's probably some industrial uses for the bugs, though. Perhaps this is where we get Sanhedrin, right? The tribe of Dan were said to be judges, right? They wear these colorful robes and ephods, like a wasp or something. And then they are the ones who judge what is edible or not. Or maybe they just were these heathens, right? They dealt with like poisonous animals and snakes and stuff. And they need to be cataloged, right? That's essentially what medicine was at that point. In order to make money, and also you don't want to paralyze yourself or paralyze others. Or maybe you do. I don't know. Maybe you do. And, of course, well, today even we know venom and all and the serum, they have medicinal properties as an antidote, right? And they can be beneficial. And it's the FDA that kind of sets the limits, right, whether within you can work with, right? They say if you can show within some statistical probability that you can conclude that whatever medicine you're giving is going to have these kind of properties, and then they're not going to poison you, or they're going to fall within these legal limits, right? That's what the FDA does. It judges what's good and what's not for us to ingest, food or drug, right, in the market. And that's somewhat like Leviticus. So in addition, we know that Abraham comes from Chaldean right? So that when you say Chaldean in Greece, it's like Chalcedoni or Chalcedonia, right? And then we get this hedon at the end. And perhaps, again, that there are these kind of Western Semites or these nomads who come from the West, right? And then that's how they knew them in as these hedonists. And then, or like these bronze these segmented hedron shapes or something on them, or these ephods. They look like wasp. In the end of Genesis, Pharaoh doesn't even want to look at the Israelites, right? When Joseph is his assistant, he says they're kind of disgusting. He doesn't want to eat with them. And maybe that's because they eat nasty stuff, right? Maybe they did eat bugs. And the Pharaoh didn't want to be around that. And likewise, in the Greek myths, Achilles, who's like a pharaoh, he doesn't want to eat with Agamemnon, right? Who's like Moses. They never really eat together. They make up over a drink offering and this dialogue, but right, that the main meals that Achilles eats, he doesn't eat with Agamemnon. Anyways, let's go back to the myth of Abraham. There's a famine, so he heads to Egypt, right? Abraham goes west to Egypt. Genesis 12. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abraham went down to Egypt to live there for a while, because the famine was severe. As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, "Look, I know that you are a beautiful woman, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife,' and they will kill me, but will let you live. Please say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and on account of you my life will be spared." So when Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. When Pharaoh's officials saw Sarah, they commended her to him, and she was taken into the palace of Pharaoh. He treated Abram well on her account, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, men servants and maid servants, and camels. Okay, when Abram goes to Egypt, there's the theme of hiding your wife upon entering a country. And Isaac does the same thing. Isaac, the son of Abraham, does the same thing. And Abraham explains that he disguises his wife Sarah's identity because she's pretty, right? And would get Abraham killed. So it's kind of this relative nature of the market, right? And it's the relative nature of the gods and goddesses and the myths. Also, the fact that Sarah, right, is consciously hidden by saying that she's the sister of Abraham. I think it's like when Perseus, right, he's given this armor by Athena, right? Well, because Athena, well, she's a virgin. She's also atheistic, and she's a sister, right? She's the sister of Apollo. She's the sister of Mars. She's the sister of all the gods, really, of the Olympians. So atheism and Sarah posing as his relative, right, allows Abraham to gain entry and exit out of Egypt, ultimately with a profit. He profits when he leaves Egypt. And then the Greek myths, Perseus, well, he also gets from Hades his cap of invisibility, which allows him to go unnoticed, right? He's not just nobody suspects him. And then again, Hermes gives him the sandals. Well, he gives him the sandals to make money, right? Which Abraham does when he leaves Egypt. And then if you're going to the Greek myths, Hesiod's theogony, well, he says that Perseus, well, he goes out towards the night and ocean, where he means he goes west, right? So where the sun sets in the west. And then Oceanos, well, it's synonymous with the Nile River, right? I think they thought that, well, you could go around the world, essentially, if you go from one end of the Nile to the other. And that it was this kind of connecting stream. And according to the myths, it's the Hesperides, right, who guard the apple tree that's somewhere near probably the Straits of Heracles, right? Today we know it's where Spain meets Africa out west, where the Mediterranean is essentially closing it off, right? Or it's kind of at this strait that the Mediterranean is separated from the Atlantic Ocean. Again, Gorgon, she means this unmarketable corner of the vast ocean, right? She's this black market. In other words, there's a famine, right? And that Perseus, well, he goes west, right? He has to go west. And the same thing that Abraham goes west. And it could also be interpreted that, well, he speaks this Western Semitic dialogue or dialect. And then it's the same thing when they say that he goes west, they could just mean that he's this kind of Western Semitic nomad, right? Because he ends up back in Canaan, or he ends up back, he doesn't die in Egypt. The splitting up. Well, there's also the splitting up, right? That Abraham and Lot split up. And it could be, again, the splitting of the Semitic linguistic branch, right? Because when Hesiod, he says Hesperides liguophono, right? So it's like Hesperides Western, liguophono is like voice, or it could be like a dialect that he speaks this Western voice, or it's this clear dialect that's from the West. So along with the Hesperides are the stene, where stene means to strengthen, or it could be like a shiny or silken garb of a priest. Right, it's like a moth or a silk, and that stene is like this goddess, or it's shiny, but it's also to strengthen the material, because it could be that to weave something gives it strength. Furthermore, there is Urali, or maybe broad salt. If you just take a literal meaning of it, just like this broad salty sea, or the Dead Sea, maybe if you think about it in the Hebrew myths, or it could be Atlantic. Right? It could be that the saltiness of the Nile increases as you get to the mouth of the delta, or just in general, right? That when you go from two different bodies of water, that they could have different salinity, and then it kind of, there's a gradient between them, right? So just looking at, well, when you look at AL, you could have salt, or it could be this kind of babble, or it could be well, again, this kind of unutterable word. And it's interesting because, well, the Spanish, when they ended up down in at the southern tip of South America, they were able to navigate their way through the Straits of Magellan from, well, what's today Argentina, and then to Chile. Then they access the Pacific Ocean. They use the knowledge, well, that you take drinking samples every so often, and then, well, the water, depending on how close you are to, salt water or the coast, it's going to be, proportional to how salty the water is, right? So if you keep going in and it keeps getting fresher, the water tastes more like fresh water, well, then you're going towards inland, right? And then vice versa. If you're inland, there's going to be a point where the water might start getting saltier again, and then you know that you've kind of crossed over like this halfway point or something, or that you're going towards another coast. So Hesiod says that she, Medusa, was mortal, but the two were undying and grew not old. So if you have these two different concentrated liquids and then you connect them, they're going to diffuse, and eventually you're going to reach this kind of equilibrium. And what happens is that the myth says that Medusa, or the middle, changes, but the ends are the same, right? They're either going to be both salty, if they're both oceans, or one's fresh and the other salty. There's going to be this kind of gradient flow from one to the other, but at the end they're both going to be salty, right? And then there could be an interpretation for oil, right? Probably the better interpretation is that Medusa means to she means to polish the oil or anoint metal or stone, right? Protecting it from oxidation, right? That I think this kind of deals with this, well, the theme of getting water from the stone, right? And this is kind of like one of the times that water's gotten from the stone, and that in the Greek myths there's also the Hydra, right? They get the Hydra comes from the cave, and the Hydra is like the water. So in Exodus, Moses draws water out of the stone. I think it's at least twice, right? He can transform kind of this salt or mineral rock into liquid fresh water. And then one time it's from throwing wood into a pool of salt water, and it changes it to fresh. Then they learn, and this could be that they learned, well, it could just be that you had to learn how to navigate right on the salt water. And then that's how you'll find fresh water that way easier than kind of roaming around. And it's probably about making altars and wells as well. That's how you kind of increase the flow of trade, that these altars or temples are where you can get more fresh water, right? Because we associate, well, nymphs and rivers, and also altars or temples with fountains, right, with water. So from Hesiod's Theogony, with her lay the dark-haired one, the dark-haired one is Poseidon, in a soft meadow amid spring flowers, and when Perseus cut off her head, there sprang forth Chrysosaur and the horse Pegasus, who is called so because he was born near the spring of ocean, and that other because he has a golden blade in his hands. Now Pegasus flew away and left the earth and the mother of flocks, and came to the deathless gods, and he dwells in the house of Zeus, and brings to wise Zeus the thunder and lightning. So I had mentioned earlier about Medusa and paralysis, right? So Medusa, the myth goes, she lays with Poseidon, the dark-haired one, and it said it's paralego, right, to lie with, or quite literally, para-lie. And this, I interpret it to become paralyzed by Medusa, right? You're turned to stone. Poseidon is also known as this position or depositing god, right? He's like deposit something concrete, or just kind of the act of making these freshwater springs available, right? And this expands trade. And then Pegasus perhaps he's like the pail, right? He's like the pail that fetches the water from the well. Remember that Abraham, he sends his angel to meet Rebecca, and then he fetches the water for her, and I think it's like Isaac, he ends up lifting the rock up in order to get water in his like mythology. So there's a lot of this kind of going to the water well, and then you meet someone there, or you meet a woman, and allows God and his angel to carry out their will. Essentially, that angel, maybe he could be understood as Zeus, who's, of course, in the Greek myth, he's the father of Heracles. And then we can understand Heracles as Jacob, and then Isaac would be this Amphitryon, right? And Perseus, again, is Abraham. So we can also say that Poseidon, he's like Reuben, right? Reuben is the son of Jacob, or he's like this Reubenite character, the tribe of Reuben. And that Reuben goes up, and then he lies in his father's bed, right? And that's why he gets punished, or he doesn't get, he gets passed over for his blessings, right? And that Judah is then the one who ends up getting it, because the Levites and the Reubenites, right, they're passed over. Where here, Poseidon, again, is said to be paralego, or he lies with, right? The paralego, to lie with, again, is this thing that Reuben is known for. So let's go back to Genesis 13. Lot proceeds towards Sodom. And Lot looked out and saw the whole plain of Jordan, and all the way to Zoar, was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose the whole plain of the Jordan for himself, and set out towards the east. And Abram and Lot parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, but Lot settled in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent towards Sodom. But the men of Sodom were wicked, sinning greatly against the Lord. And then God renews the promise to Abram. After Lot had departed, the Lord said to Abram, Now lift up your eyes from the place where you are, and look to the north and south and east and west. For all the land you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if one could count the dust of the earth, then your offspring could be counted. Get up and walk around the land through its length and breadth, for I will give it to you. So Abraham moved his tent and went to live near the oaks of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. So Abram and Lot split, and it's like the Heraclean story. I'd imagine that the shambling ox, right, that escapes, and then it ends up going all over Europe, and then it transverses the isthmus of Corinth, or crosses it, right? And it's called the seventh labor of Heracles. And if you look at the map of Abraham's journey, right, they cross over the isthmus twice, or he at least crosses over it, and he comes back to Bethel again, and then he makes the altar, and then of course Bethel is also where Jacob kind of makes his altar, or he polishes or anoints the stones. So whereas on the Greek side you have the pillars of Heracles, right, and it's of course after all these travels that Heracles does, he erects, or he holds on to these pillars. And the 10th labor, right? Not to be confused with the 7th labor. It's the 10th labor. And in the 10th labor, Heracles needs the help of the sun to cross over the Straits of Gibraltar. And then he comes back. And then this is after wandering over Europe and Asia. And then back to Lot and Abraham splitting. They're effectively splitting the capital, right, between east and west of Jerusalem or Bethlehem or whatever, right? And it just reminds me of the Iliad and a lot of other things, right? That, again, these themes repeat that, that Diomedes is like a Diocletian figure, right? That he takes some power from from Agamemnon, right? Who Agamemnon is the physical capital. And that you have to have two capitals, or that you have two capitals in the Median Empire, right? The Medians had two capitals, a summer and then a spring capital. And they probably had a capital, for the money and the minting, and then they had one for kind of the legislating, maybe like the priestly class. Or in Exodus, right, this is where Jethro, he comes back to visit Moses, and then he says, Moses, you have to delegate your power, right, to the Levite priests and judges. You can't do everything. You can't judge everything. We know that Poseidon, again, he means position, and that Pegasus, it could be the drinking well, or the ability to travel, right? You have all these known altars or places to get fresh water. You have all these kind of cities. And then, again, travel becomes more prevalent. And then we associate goddesses, nymphs, and temples with fountains, springs, lakes, but also cities, right, and towns.
And then Poseidon, right, he's a founding god. He founds towns along with Apollo. He's also associated with travel over water, right? So, like in the Odyssey, that water and land are separate, right, as well as Hades, right? The myth is that Hades, Zeus, and Poseidon, they draw lots for positions after the Titan War, and it's Zeus who gets the heaven, Poseidon gets the sea, and then Hades gets the underground. And then Hades, well, in Hades, if you spell Hades in Greek, it's like A-I-D, right? You could just say A-I-D, right? And this is like A-I, right? in the Hebrew, there's a town called Ai, right? And that lot splits, and then it goes to I think they split, and it's like by Ai or after they visit Ai. And then Ai in AID in Greek, like AD means like he is, right? And it's kind of like Yahweh in Hebrew, where Yahweh says that Moses is God. He says, he is God. And then Moses proclaims, I am, or something. Or maybe it could be understood as something like that, right? That he is kind of like I am. It's just different. It's a different form of the verb to be, right? And then Genesis, likewise, Lot separates from Abraham, right? And then the Lord tells him at a place between Ai or Hades, right? So also, again, that Poseidon, he rapes Medusa. And because of this, she becomes this hideous figure. And then Poseidon, of course, is like Reuben, or the tribe of Reuben, who's punished by coming on to his father's couch. And it's also Reuben that tells Jacob the mandrakes to have sex with his mother Leah. I think it's Leah. And he's just generally associated with nepotism. I think that's why we call him Neptune in the Roman mythology. And generally, he favors ending these kind of potentially bloody familiar feuds, or he signals kind of this peaceful or separation of states of matter, right? That he's the separating of the liquid from the solid or the gas. And then it's kind of done in this, equitable fashion that each kind of gets their own domain. Or that Perseus is Noah, right? And then that the cabesus, or the sack that carries all his belongings, like the cabesus carries all Perseus' belongings, or that lot carries Abraham's belongings. This is like the ark, right? That the ark carries all Noah's belongings, the animals, and all the people that he loves. And it's like, this is like a book or a matrix, right? The ark is not necessarily an ark. It's a book or something that contains all this information up to that point, this catalog. Really, just reading the Greek, we understand it's probably, when they talk about Pegasus or something at that moment, right, that it's just like this golden, he has this golden, Perseus is riding Pegasus, and it's like the clouds, this white clouds, and then there's this golden instrument in his hand. Maybe it's like the golden dome in Jerusalem, right? And that Perseus is kind of this perimeter, or this world that the Judaism or Christianity, which is wishes to like encompass, right? This whole world. They wish to take over the whole world. And that is, right, that Jerusalem is near the ocean, or the ocean kind of surrounds it. That it's kind of by the isthmus, right? That if you read the 7th and then like the 10th labors of Heracles, it's about this traversing and then coming back, right? And then wandering. And again, that's kind of like Abraham or Jacob, when they go to Egypt and then they come back over the isthmus, and then they built temples or altars, right? And then we understand that the Dead Sea, it's probably like the Salt Sea or the Urali, or they say that Pontus is this kind of fruitless sea, right? It's this Dead Sea. And then just in practical sense, right? To create a well, you have to dig, right? And to make the altar, or to found something, you have to kind of make something concrete or positive, right? To posit something, this Poseidon. And then the water you're gonna find it by probing, right? This kind of perimeter of probing. And then you're gonna, maybe how you find a river or something, a fresh water source, is that you keep tasting the salt water until eventually you get to a lake or something from the coast. And then to make the well, maybe you have to like burn the bush or clear the area. And then eventually you flatten the area, and then you're going to start irrigating it, digging ditches and wells and stuff. And from the water, you get the mill, right? Or the ability to create wheat and meal for bread and food for both humans and animals, and then from there you could get more stable civilization, right? And then you also get trade. Pegasus, the fountain, or this ability to make fountains, right? It allows for lightning, or the will of Zeus, right? Zeus is the miller, so he needs his will to be fulfilled. How do you do that with a fountain, right? This kind of fountain. And then Chrysaor, this. All right, so reading further into Hesiod, Chrysaor was joined in love to Calliope, the daughter of glorious Ocean, and begot three-headed Geryones. So the golden instrument, or Chrysaor, perhaps it's like the golden dome, right? Or it's the well-watered Garden of Eden. To make a garden well-watered, you have to irrigate it, right? And you have to use tools. And around, it could be around Bethlehem or Jerusalem or wherever these altars that they're building around, kind of when they come back from traversing over the isthmus. And then if you look at their names, well, Calliope is like to mix well, or it's like a three-pronged hoe or fork, we can imagine. And then Chrysaor, again, is a golden instrument, so it's like a tool, or just golden tool. So if they form these two together, you give to this like three-headed Geryones, right? Geryones is a three-headed dog, right? So you give up to this like, or it could mean to literally tear the earth, right? It can mean to like work the earth. So then you have this like three-headed thing that tears the earth, right? It's like a fork or a prong or a hoe or something. And then possibly Pegasus is like the weather or something, or the springtime of storms that come and go that allow, again, Zeus to have his will fulfilled. So it depends where you are, right? Sometimes you need if you're in the desert, it might not rain, so you have to know where to dig wells. But if you were like in the plains, right? If you were like a Hittite or something, or you live in the Anatolian plains, you probably worship Zeus as this storm god, and then Pegasus is kind of mediator. He goes between the air and the ground, right? Whereas like the Jewish people, they're digging in the ground. They're more chthonic, and they dig these wells. Also, we can note the Garden of Eden in Genesis 2 or 3. It's described that there's a junction of four rivers, and that could be that, well, you join these two deities to form the three-headed Geryones, right? And also, when reading the story of Abraham, there's the five kings, or the War of the Five Kings. For that, he rescues Lot. Abram rescues Lot. So, from Genesis 14, now the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some men fell into the pits, but the survivors fled to the hill country. The four kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food, and they went on their way. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since Lot was living in Sodom. Then an escapee came in and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. Now Abram was living near the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were bound by treaty to Abram. And when Abram heard this, his relative had been captured, he mobilized the 318 trained men born in his household, and they set out in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his forces and routed Chedorlaomer, and routed the army, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He retrieved all the goods, as well as his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the rest of the people. Melchizedek blesses Abram. After Abraham returned from his defeating the kings and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him in the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine, since he was priest of God Most High. And he blessed Abram and said, Blessed be Abram, my God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who's delivered your enemies into your hand. Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of everything. The king of Sodom said to Abram, Give me the people, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram replied to the king of Sodom,
I have raised my hand to the Lord God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will not accept even a thread or a strap of a sandal or anything that belongs to you, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten in the share for the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. They may take their portion. And just now, so now switching over to Hesiod, and we'll try to tie all this together. So from Hesiod's Theogony, him, mighty Hercules slew in sea-girt Erythea by his shambling oxen on that day when he drove the wide-browed oxen to holy Terence, and had crossed the ford of ocean and killed Orthus and Eurytion, the herdsman in the dim stead out beyond glorious ocean. And in a hollow cave she bore another monster, irresistible, and in no wise like either to mortal men or to the undying god, even the goddess fierce Echidna, who is half a nymph with glancing eyes and fair cheeks, and half again a huge snake, great and awful, with speckled skin, eating raw flesh beneath the secret parts of the holy earth. And there she has a cave. She has a cave deep down under a hollow rock, far from the deathless gods and mortal men. There then did the gods appoint her a glorious house to dwell in, and she keeps guard in Arima beneath the earth, grim Echidna, a nymph who dies not nor grows old all her day. So all that. First, let's say that so first Hesiod describes, well, basically the 10th labor of Heracles, where he captures the deer of Geryon, right? Where Geryon, remember, is the three-headed dog. So it's also kind of like the third labor, where the third labor of Heracles is, well, again, the third and the 10th are a lot alike. They're pretty similar, where they both involve the sun, and they're crossing over these bodies of water. In addition, Abraham and Jacob's journey during Genesis their journey is kind of like the 7th labor of Heracles. So where Heracles is in the 7th labor is tasked with chasing down the Cretan bull. So in addition, Abraham and Jacob's journey during Genesis, well, their journeys are a lot like the 7th labor of Heracles too, where he's tasked with chasing down the Cretan bull. So the Cretan bull is also a lot like the Pegasus story, right, involving Perseus. And at the end, there's a bull, right? He rises up out of the water, and then he's harried. He harries the residents, and he ends up crossing over the isthmus, and then he ends up, Heracles has to chase him down, right? And it's Poseidon who raises him up out of the ocean. It's like, right, that Poseidon lays with Medusa, and then from that, her head comes Pegasus, right, when Perseus cuts off her head. And then Perseus, well, what does his name mean? It means like this perimeter, or to pierce through, or to probe for water, or for a good shoreline, right? To travel around, to travel around, and then probably find good places strategically for crossings, but also for trade, right? To kind of, well, set a temple, an altar there. That's a good way to probably make money, or to get people, or a way to profit, right? As a way to profit. Kind of channel the flow to your shrine or your temple. And it can also be looking for a weakness in a wall or of defense, right, to pierce through, or you're going to probe around the wall if you're going to sack or siege a city and you want to find the weak spot to pierce through, because Perseus means to pierce through. It also means kind of to pursue something, right, or to persecute, where Heracles pursues the shambling cattle, right, across the continent, and then the Cretan bull he traverses the isthmus, right? And that the isthmus cuts through the water, where the water is on both sides. And then it says to kill Orthus, right? To kill Orthus means to like pierce straight through something. And again, that's what an isthmus do. And isthmus does, right? And if you look at, well, Abraham or Jacob's journeys, right, in Genesis, what do? They go to Egypt and then they come back. And then if you read Heracles, well, the oxen just goes all around, and then it crosses over the isthmus. And then likewise, Perseus, right, he chases down. He goes west, and then he comes back, and then he kills after killing the Medusa. Perseus, we can also think of as like a pirate, right? Hesiod also describes the 3rd and 10th labor of Heracles again, that it says, when he says it, he says like the earth is like an ellipsoid covered in water, and then Perseus wants to cross the ocean strait again. This to kill Orthos, right? He's gonna go across this ellipsoid strait. Of course, well, it could also mean that that's where the Straits of Gibraltar are, right? That if you want to get out to this ocean, you have to go to cross the Straits of Gibraltar, and there's gonna be like a sea monster there or something. And then Apollodorus explains that the Heracles in the 10th labor, well, again, it's this circular or ellipsoid goblet, right, from the sun. And then that's how Heracles crosses over the Strait of Gibraltar in this, again, this ellipsoid or goblet from the sun. And maybe they thought of the sun itself as kind of like this circular ball of water. But it's probably most likely they thought of the globe as this circular ball of water, right? And again, Perseus would be a perimeter, right? He'd be like the bounds of the known world. In the 3rd labor, it's Apollo who shows up with Artemis, and Heracles in the river is in the river, and he's going after the red deer, right? Where there, it's called the Erythea, right? And then Erythro is red. So Heracles is like Jacob again. He says that, well, they both kind of wrestle around, right? They wrestle with God, or they know God after wrestling around in the river. And then Jacob, well, he says he hurt his hip. And then Heracles, it's somewhat like he hurts his hip, and that the oxen that he's chasing, right, it's like shambling across the continent. And it's shambling is like, he's got like a hitch, right? He's got like a hitch in his wagon or something. Maybe that they understood that oxen pushed the wagon, right? And there was like a hitch in it. And then, so next in Hesiod's theogony, he describes the Echidna, and eventually we'll get to the story of the Hydra, which again, these are both kind of like getting water out of the rock. So the Echidna and the Hydra could also represent oil, though, right? That oil has the ability to get lit on fire for light. And they said that Echidna, right? Echidna has quick glancing eyes that she keeps like in the dark, and that she's in the cave underneath the undying gods, but that she herself is a nymph that dies not nor grows old all her day, right? That it's like she has like this everlasting day, that she's like the light, right? She can produce the light. And then that the oil is in the ground, it doesn't like go bad, right? Oil itself is kind of like a rotten thing, right? The oil itself is like the product of a rot. And then Hesiod remarks she has speckled skin, she's snake-like, and she's flesh-eating or rotten, right? Again, it's like oil. The speckled skin is like the sheen or the rainbow pattern of oil. And, of course, oil set on fire, and it lights up the room, which is the glancing eyes of Echidna. She lives underneath the ground in caves. You can have a fire, and it allows people to live in homes around the year. And then fire. Well, oil is like a snake, right? It's like this analogy. You can't hold on to something, right? It's really slippery, and it's always going to change its position, and eventually it's going to end up on the ground, right? But oil is also good for squeaky parts. So I think that's probably what when we think about Jacob, he's also like a snake. He's also probably like a snake oil salesman, right? Maybe that when they say he's got a hitch in your wagon wheel, that they understood that oil, right? That you had to oil the joints or the axle, right? This wide, the shambling oxen, right? Of that Heracles is chasing. Also, the oil can be used for tar, right? And that's mentioned a few times in Genesis with regards to building walls and fortifying oneself, like Genesis 11, right, where they talk about how tar was used for building the Tower of Babel instead of concrete. And then there's tar pits that are, again, mentioned in Genesis 14, where Abram rescues Lot, right? And maybe that's the oil allows him to get all the possessions, right? So, again, Echidna. And then Echidna, well, if you look at Echidna in Greek, it translates, well, if you translate it just quite literally to English, it'd be like sun or perhaps helical eye, right? We understand that there's an eye in the sun or something. And then perhaps that's how we understand that light of the flame, right? It comes from this burning oil, and that Jewish myth, they worship a flame, right? They don't worship the sun. That Moses says, "Oh, don't worship the sun. You worship the flame."
and that's what they understand, right? This Echidna, this Helicopus, right? This sun, the eye of the sun. In addition, oil could be used for polishing stones and metals, right? To make them last longer or forever, right? Because if otherwise they're going to be left exposed to the elements and they're going to corrode and oxidize and become weak and brittle, and they'll be worth less in value. Or if it's just a stone, you're going to get corrosion of the stone itself, and it might become more brittle. But there could also be, like, chemical properties that could be beneficial if you understand it. But I don't think that's what is meant exactly by that. I think when they say Medusa to make someone stone forever is that you have to oil the stone. You have to do it kind of mediated, right? You have to kind of keep on it. Or it's this medium. Again, Medusa can be understood as protecting or preventing this oxidative layer, or conversely, that the oil encases the stone, right? It stops it from corroding or oxidizing. And then Jacob, of course, right? He anoints the stone after his vision from God, right? And it's Abraham who rescues Lot, right? Into the oil. And then it says he goes away to the far remote places, all the way to the country of Dan, right? He goes to this far away country. And then, well, we got to look at the word petroleum. It means water from the rock. It means water from the rock. And then if we go further, if we read from Hesiod, it says like Kato, Coil, Hypo, Petro, Talo, right? So it's like the coils under the rock in a faraway country, which is essentially how we get the word petroleum, right? It's just like a snake. It's slippery, and then the coils is like underneath the rock in this kind of like faraway place, right? And that's kind of how we understand, well, that Abraham, he rescues Lot, right? But he has to go away to this faraway country, right? And then Dan, well, Dan could mean a lot of things, right? So going further, we'll say undying in Greek is theo. And it's also the word deity. It could also mean gleam or shine, so that the Jewish people worship the flame, right? They understand that a god or a deity somewhat means to gleam or shine, right? And then to anoint with oil is to protect something, right? To encase something, and that, well, essentially that's what Abraham's going to mean, right? And that, well, in the Greek myths, we know that Atlas holds up the rock too, right? In some cases, Heracles tricks him to get the apples guarded by the Hesperides, right? That the apples are in a faraway country again, right? This faraway country. And Atlas holds up the rock. In some cases, people think he holds up the earth, right? This rock. But in reality, it's the sky, right? If you read, quite literally means the sky. But some people understand that he holds up this rock in the far country, right? This like petroleum. Now, I argue that the tribes, well, we could say that the tribes of Naphtali could probably be linked to like Echidna and Hephaestus and the fire gods, right? Or some fire gods, not all the fire gods, but this fire god Hephaestus. And that in like the Hebrew myths, the tribes of Naphtali, well, they end up attaching to the tribes of Judah later on, right? I mean, essentially, all the tribes do unite under kind of the line of Judaism or the line of Judah. But we know specifically, right, that Naphtali does, right? Maybe that I don't know, I'd have to read the specific text to say where it happens, but it's stated, right, if you read on like Wikipedia or other kind of sources, that Naphtali later on joins on to the tribe of Judah. And then the tribe of Dan, of course, will join or ally with the tribe of Judah later on as well, right? And then, of course, that Perseus, well, we know Perseus and Heracles are Danaids, right? So we're going to say that they are like the tribe of Dan. And if we read further right into Hesiod, we'll look at, well, there's one prefix that's kind of interesting. It's like SPE or SPHE. So you could have spe or sphe that shows up in the paragraph about Echidna. So it's like you have speos, which is like a cavern or a grotto, which today would mean like space, right? And then you have this SP eta I, right? So it's like sphe. Is to draw, or probably like to spew, right? Or spill, or maybe to Joseph, right? From the Genesis, or the book of Genesis, just by kind of literal spellings. And then reading to the end, it says that Echidna is like this snake-like creature, and it lives in well-guarded arema. In Greek, it goes that Hades. Well, if you just like kind of read it in this, just translate every word and just read it in this kind of weird, like translated English, right? That Hades draws to itself this arema, or what's called aremoisin, right? That under the earth, and it's like a baneful snake that Moses, right, that we know it's kind of what it says, that Moses is called Moses because he is drawn from the earth, right? He's like a snake. And that's how we know Moses, that he's drawn from the earth, right? He's in the basket, that he's drawn out. That's Moses means to draw out, right? So if you read it in Greek, and then aremoisin, or Morris, aremoision, right? He's like this Zionist. And it's like Moses, that we call Moses, again, he's just drawn out from the ground. And likewise, in Genesis 3, it's God tells the snake he'll have to move on the ground on his belly his whole life, that the snake, it's like oil, it's slippery. Moses is this kind of capitalist. He's this plutocrat. He's a snake oil salesman, right? Moses is not, he's somewhat of an interesting character, but at the end of the day, he's a snake oil salesman, or he's a plutocrat. Unless you're him, you hate him, basically. It's good to be him, but it's not good to not be him, right? Maybe that the caves are, and then we go further, maybe the caves are like a Masonic lodge, right? And perhaps that this is where we get the term Illuminati. Again, that the room could be filled with light, and even underground, that it's like this, and he has like undying days, right? Basically, the Echidna is, it means like this undying day, right? It's all like illuminated light, and then in Genesis, we know that when the angels of the Lord, they saved Lot from Sodom, they're kind of blinded, right, by this light, I'd imagine. And they're like blinded. They can't see or can't find Lot. And these would-be rapists, right, the would-be rapists can't get to Lot, and they're allowed to escape. And it's this illumination or something, or this blinding light. And again, this is kind of a stupid term, Illuminati, right, that people use to cope. So Diodorus or Diodorus writes about oil and tar as well. So his name is Herodotus, right? Herodotus, the historian. So plenty of people seem to corroborate that there's this type of oil works going on, right? I mean, today we understand oil is like this huge business, and the type of people who are in oil, and why do we fight in the Middle East? We fight in the Middle East for oil. I mean, for Zionism too as well, but for oil. And it's all the same, right? That Moses means aremoision, right? Okay. And going further, so moving along to Genesis 15, from Genesis 14, from Hesiod's lines 270 to 305 to lines 305 to 335. So you're just turning the page on Hesiod. And Genesis 15 will start. God's covenant with Abram. After these events, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward. But Abram replied, O Lord God, what can you give me, since I remain childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Abram continued, Behold, you have given me no offspring, so a servant in my household will be my heir. Then the word of the Lord came to Abram, saying, This will not be your heir, but one who comes from your own body will be your heir. And the Lord took him outside and said, Now look to the heavens and count the stars. If you are able, then he told him, so shall your offspring be. Abram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. The Lord also told him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you to this land to possess. God. And then moving along, God confirms his promise. But Abram replied, Lord God, how can I know that I will possess it? The Lord said to him, Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a turtle dove and a young pigeon. So Abram brought all these to him, split each of them down the middle, and laid the halves opposite each other. The birds, however, he did not cut in half. Okay, good. And then the birds of prey descended on the carcasses, but Abram drove them away as the sun was setting. Abram fell into a deep sleep, and suddenly great terror and darkness overwhelmed him. Then the Lord said to Abram, Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not their own. They will be enslaved and mistreated for 400 years. But I will judge the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will depart with many possessions. You, however, will
however, will go to your fathers in peace and be buried at a ripe old age. In the fourth generation, your descendants will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. When the sun had set and darkness had fallen, behold, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch appeared and passed between the halves of the carcasses. And that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your descendants I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, the land of the Canaanites, Kezanites, and blah, 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 Jebusites. In Genesis 15, Abraham, he receives his new name, right? He's known as Abraham. And that he is this shield, where the shield can be understood. Well, it's like Perseus. He's this perimeter, right? Similar again to how we think of Perseus. And to shield can also mean to anoint with oil, right? A rock or this altar. Basically to encase a solid to protect it from corroding, right? Just kind of shine the eye of Medusa on it, right? To make this stone to last forever, to paralyze it, to lie with Poseidon, right? To lie, to become paralyzed or deposited. And then we also can look at the aleph, or the a suffix, right? That Abram, right? He's like this encased Brahmin, right? He's not this typical Brahmin. He's atypical or something, right? When somebody is atypical, they're not typical. So he's not like this Brahmin. He's somewhat of a different Brahmin. That's why he's probably of note, right? And the aleph, or the a suffix in Greek, is to make a shell of the root word. It's kind of to make a portico or a stow of it, right? That the encasing or oxidation, if one doesn't anoint or oil the stone, can give it some good and bad properties. That oxidation, well, for one, we know it can release heat, right? That the chimera, or the hexameron, or the oxymoron, this half lion, half bird, half snake, half dragon or something, right? Goat, it breathes fire, right? It's much like the rust or the iron powder that you have in hand warmers, right? When you get a hand warmer, it's because it's releasing heat from this oxidation reaction. That's kind of this hexameron. And then when Abraham, he goes and does all these weird sacrifices, and he like cuts animals in half and burns them, right? And then he has this dream. Well, it's like the hexameron or the chimera, but it's also like the story of Joseph, right? And the Pharaoh, and he has dreams, right? That Joseph is able to dream of things. And as well as the chimera. And that Bellerophon, he kills the chimera with the help of Pegasus. And that Pegasus, well, he's kind of like the fountain, right? That we can understand that maybe that water puts out fire. That if you put water on the fire, it's going to make a bunch of steam's going to come up and stuff, right? Perseus, well, with the help of Pegasus, he kills Medusa as well. And the oil protects the stone. But that water, maybe that another thing that we get out of this, that water doesn't put out the oil, right? That the oil floats on top of the water. And then that the anointing, or the aleph, well, again, it's like this encasing. And that we understand the aleph somewhat as like, well, between Jacob and Esau. That Esau, well, that Jacob, like Esau is like this typical Bronze Age person, right? That he's like this good farmer. And that Jacob, well, he has a lot of desires, right? But he encases himself, right? That he anoints the rock. That he doesn't want to kind of lead on Esau at the end, right? That he puts all the goats and all these other kind of animals and people in front of him when he goes to meet Esau again, right? Because he's afraid. He encases himself. He's afraid of letting out his innermost desires, his power, right? It's his conscience with God, his covenant. And Esau is like, well, again, he's like the typical, he's the type, right? And that Jacob is the kind of the aleph on it, right? Or maybe you could say vice versa, that Esau is kind of the shell, right? And that Jacob is kind of like the innermost desire. And that's why he hides behind all these animals again when he goes to meet up with Esau again. Ishmael is similar to Esau, right? Ishmael is the first son of Abraham and then the Hagar. Because remember, Sarah, she's old and then Abraham's old and they don't have any kids. So Ishmael is like the Hydra because, well, again, Ishmael is pushed out with the mother and then they're dying of thirst and then God appears, right? And then they get water from the rock. And then in Greek, right, in certain applications in English, right? Hydra is literally water, right? Hydro means water, so you're getting the hydro from the cave. It's water out of the rock, and then again, it's like I'm not quite sure because this could also be oil, right? Again, that Bellerophon, he kills the Chimera with Pegasus. That could be like pouring water on fire, but the Hydra, well, it has two heads for every head that you cut off, right? And it's like, well, if you put water on oil fire, it's going to spread, right? Or something, or that's kind of how fire spread. Fire, you can cut it in half and then spread it, right? It's not like necessarily like water. And then Ishmael, just looking at his name, he's kind of like an isthmus, right? That he's surrounded by water. Or that Ishmael is said to have hands on him from everywhere and his hands on them. And then that's kind of like what an isthmus is surrounded by water. And then Heracles, he kills Orthus, or he pushes or pierces straight through the water. Orthus means straight. Perseus means to pierce. And then if you look at the seventh labor of Heracles, the cow shambles and traverses the isthmus, right? That Ishmael is like the isthmus. And then, moreover, the Hydra is also like the covenant of the circumcision that, well, maybe they burned or cauterized the penis or just wounds in general after cutting to stop, and aim to stop the spread of diseases, just like today you might do it. And especially in Leviticus, right? They talk about the sores and the hair colors and how they evolve over time. And then that helps them determine the diagnosis, right? And then the Hydra, well, the Hydra has 9, or he has like 10 heads, right, or something. And then when one is cut off, another one grows back. And then it's kind of like a lot of Jewish rituals. It says that you have to, well, the circumcision, you have to wait 8 days, and then you cut the penis. And at that point, they have to remain unclean, right, for a certain amount of days, so that you have to stay outside the camp, or that you're ritually unclean. And then if you stay unclean after that 8 more days or something, or that however that long you have to stay out, it doubles, right? It multiplies. And it's like for the women, if they're unclean with their periods or whatever kind of what I forget what's going on in Leviticus exactly, but you have to stay outside, and then it could keep adding or doubling or multiplying. That if you're not unclean, then you have to wait another like 20 days or 30 days or something, and it becomes like this Hydra, right? So going back to Hesiod, men say that Typhoon the terrible, outrageous, and lawless was joined in love to her, the maid with glancing eyes. So she conceived and brought forth fierce offspring. First she bore Orthus, the hound of Geryones, and then again she bore a second monster, not to be overcome, that may not be described, Cerberus, who eats raw flesh, the brazen-voiced hound of Hades, 50-headed, relentless and strong. And again she bore a third, the evil-minded Hydra of Lerna, whom the goddess white-armed Hera nourished, being angry beyond measure with the mighty Heracles, and her Heracles, the son of Zeus of the house of Amphitryon, together with warlike Iolaus, destroyed with the unpitying sword through the plans of Athena, the spoil driver. She was the mother of the Chimera, who breathed raging fire, a creature fearful, great, swift-footed, and strong, who had 3 heads, one of a grim-eyed lion, another of a goat, and another of a snake, a fierce dragon. In her forepart she was a lion, in her hind part a dragon, in her middle a goat, breathing forth a fearful blast of blazing fire. Her did Pegasus and noble Bellerophon slay. But Echidna was subject in love to Orthus, and brought forth the deadly Sphinx, which destroyed the Cadmeans, and the Nemean lion, which Hera, the good wife of Zeus, brought up and made to haunt the hills of Nemea, a plague to men. There he preyed upon the tribes of her own people, and had power over Tratus of Nemea and Ipsos. Yet there the strength of stout Heracles overcame him, and Cato was joined in love to Phorcys, and bore her youngest, the awful snake, who guards the apples of gold in the secret places of the dark earth at its great bounds. This is the offspring of Cato and Phorcys, or Phorcys. So we'll start at the beginning. What does Typhoon mean? Well, it could be translated to smoke rising up, or as this kind of violent and tempestuous person or thing, which would make sense that it was right that Typhoon was joined with this Echidna, and it's kind of like joined with the oil, and it's similar to how we read in Exodus, right, to how the tabernacle has this smoke rising above it. And if you read to the end of Theogony, you find out that Zeus ends up killing Typhoon, right? And it causes all this fire and smoke and vapor that rises up, and it could be like a furnace or, again, like a burnt sacrifice. And then moving further, Hesiod describes a three-headed dog, Orthus, that was born. And it was this is probably representative of the three visitors that come to visit Abraham in Genesis 18. I'm not going to read all of Genesis. In Genesis 18, the Lord sends his angel and Sarah and asks how it is, right? So when Sarah asks how it is that she will give birth, right? Because she's 100 years old, right? And she starts to laugh. She's like, how am I going to give birth? Because the Lord comes down with his angels. And he's talking to him why the three visitors are there, because the three visitors say you're going to have a kid. And then I interpret this as like Typhoon gives birth, right, to this 50-headed dog, Cerberus. And then in the Greek it says without any means, right? It's a makshano, without like any mechanism. It's like Sarah, and that she laughs. How can she right? She have her kids because it is a dog, right? So it says it's a bitch. And then to have kids with no means, right? So it's kind of like that. And then the 50-headed dog guards Hades. And then at Hades, you have to cross the river, of course, and then the dog is there. And it's Heracles who has to bring the 50-headed dog Cerberus back. It's the 12th labor. And again, there's three visitors that say Abraham will have a child in a year, which, of course, it's probably like the 12 labors is the 12 months. And the dog that is born by Echidna, right, this Cerberus. And then he's like, what does it say? That Cerberus is relentless and strong. And then, then Abraham, remember that he, before Sodom and Gomorrah be destroyed, he haggles with God, right? He haggles from 50 down to, I think it's like 10 people, right? It could be like Heracles, right? He goes down. He has to do the 10 labors originally, and it becomes 12, but it's this 50-headed dog, right? Like, it's this relentless dog or task, and he has to, haggle with it, right? And then Sarah and Abraham, or whoever impregnates Sarah, have a child, and it's called Isaac, who we can identify as, Amphitryon. So Amphitryon, he's the stepfather of Heracles, where we call Amphitryon, or just house of Amphitryon, this Amphitryotes, right? Amphitryotes means the son of Amphitryon. So breaking it down, we can say it means fleeing from both sides of Hades, where fleeing, trees, and then both sides, Amphi, and then Hades, Iades, right? And then so it's like you're fleeing from both sides of the hell, or the hells of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it can be that Hera nurses the Hydra, and Athena drives them on, and it's Iolaus that kills it, right? That's just this triad of the house of Amphitryon, this Amphitryotes. Or that, trees means to flee, right? It can make sense that, in the, Numbers or Deuteronomy or something, that he says to make 3 cities, right? You have to have 3 cities of, you can't flee to one city, or there's a city that you should be able to flee to, this third city, right? Perhaps Gomorrah is like the Chimera, right? Or the Zimmerin. Sodom is like Cadmus, or like the Cadmeans are being destroyed by the Sphinx. That Pegasus, right? Pegasus helps Bellerophon kill the Chimera. And then as far as Cadmus, I'm not sure 100% of the meaning, right? That Cad, it said it's not really a common Greek prefix, and it's not really in the lexicon, but we do know kind of a word, right? We know kudos. And that means well-known. And then there's meiosis, and that can mean like a mine, right? So it could be like or tomb. So it could be like a well-known mine or tomb. And maybe it's one that collapses, right? Because then, again, like Numbers or Deuteronomy, it tells, don't make a cave. Collapse the cave in before you leave, right? Don't let it collapse or so that people can fall in it, probably, or that, I don't know, maybe that to I don't know what that means. Maybe it just means a general righteous or good thing to do, right? To just destroy the cave or the mine before you leave. Or it could be that Lot and Abraham are tomb raiders, right? Or at least they're people, maybe they own mines or oil fields, right? Maybe they're aristocrats or these kind of merchants, plutocrats. Because if you read Diodorus, right, it talks about the gold mining process in Egypt. If you read about Egypt, he talks about it. And then he talks about the Jews, who were supposedly the slaves, right, along with others, of course. And perhaps when Leviticus talks about the color of skin for sores and hair, it could be like the gold making process or other ores, right? That there's some kind of oxidations or impurities. Well, they'll show themselves on the skin, right? That things will become oxidized and they'll change colors, and that could be okay, right? You could deal with it. It could just be intermediary in the whole kind of reaction or process. But it could also mean that your reaction has been fucked, right? That you kind of have impurities or you've got the reaction wrong itself, and then you got to start over, right? And that means that some people have to leave the camp, all right, or like these kind of irredeemable people, or some people they can come right back in the sick or camp because they're not that sick, right? Depending on how the diagnosis goes from the hair and the skin and stuff, and the time. And then Diodorus and Moses tell the same story along with the Greek Cadmus and Chimera, right? These huge working camps, right? They kind of all talk about these camps or these mining towns, right? And they're mining because they're going to build these huge monuments or these construction projects. And then again, it could just be the heuristics, right? A lot of things is just kind of practical stuff, right? That if you look at a rock, or any rock is going to become oxidized, and then if you know something about geology, you could say what the rock is, and then you can make money, right? Some of these ores or mines can make you rich, and you could tell through the color and the patterns of the oxidation, right? You know, it's geology. Well, for one, we know Hera has white arms, right? Poseidon, they say he has dark hair. Achilles has yellow hair. Athena has gray eyes, right? These could be oxidation states of minerals and rocks, these heuristics. So what's the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, that Pegasus, right, he's there to kill both Medusa and the Chimera. That Medusa, right, he's turning things to stone or paralyze something, right? So to anoint the stone to stop the corrosion and oxidation. And oil itself can make light. It could be blinding, and it could be bright. It can fill rooms with glancing lights. It can make the days unending, right? And this is inside, even underground in a cave. And the Chimera, well, it breathes fire. It represents the heat released, right, from an exothermic reaction, or just in general, the oxidation state of a metal. And chemistry. It could represent the fusing, though, of tribes, right, of Dan, Judah, Naphtali, and then Levi. The Chimera's half lion, it's Judah. It's half dragon or snake like Dan, right? Dan is like a dragon or snake. And then it's half ram. And it's, which could be, the ram could be like Naphtali. And it's Hera, the white-armed, the Lycos that rears the Hydra. And then Athena is the one who drives the spoil. So which one is Dan? I don't know. I think I'm still debating that, whether Hera is like just tribe of Dan or Athena is like the tribe. Probably more like Athena, or sorry, Hera. Or it could be that this tribe of Dan, right, the Danaids, right, they have kind of this diversity within their tribe, and that could be that they're represented by the horse, the scales of justice, a snake, and then an eagle or a bird, right, which could be, again, both Hera or Athena, and then some other kind of figures, right, through these myths. You could even argue that Venus is like a Danaid, right, that we don't know for sure, though. But we do know, right, what we do know is that both Heracles and Perseus are Danaids, right? They are relatives, and ancestors are Danaids. So Sodom and Gomorrah tell us that, well, if you cast all these things together into the fire, and you get these pillars of salt, and you get other things too, but mostly that fire destroys. The Jewish god of fire, or Hephaestus, right? At the end of the Iliad, Hephaestus is led on by Hera, and he destroys everything. So perhaps like Hephaestus, right? He's like Naphtali, and then Isaac, of course, is like, well, he's like the tribe of Issachar, and then the donkey. So Issachar is the donkey that finds the good resting place and then submits to God's work, and that's kind of like Abraham finds the place to build the temple, and then he's gonna sacrifice Isaac there, and then of course the God sends the ram. And then afterwards, he finds a place, and then he lives out his life there, and he's buried, right? After the Lord appears to him. And then Naphtali, again, is this doe. He's caught in a thicket, and he's set go. He's this fawn that's caught, and then he's let go. and that produces beautiful fawns. So Isaac, well, he's set free, and he becomes a patriarch in his own right, and then he's replaced with this ram, right, that's caught in a thicket with its horns. And then we have also kind of like Exodus, where there's this burning bush, right? Well, you have this like ram that's in the bush. It's not quite burning, but it's going to be burned, right? That you're going to make this sacrifice. And then we know that Naphtali is the fire itself, right? He's like this fire god. And that he's like in the bush, right? Then in Exodus, the fire is in the bush. So perhaps Artemis is like Issachar, and that Artemis is like an artisan, or that that's what's going to be left after you fire or burn something. That's going to be what settles down, that it's going to be this salt, right? That after Sodom and Gomorrah, it's just salt, right? That you've boiled all this water, you're left with salt. And then if you read the third labor of Heracles, the kine of Artemis and Apollo is caught by Heracles, but he lets it go, which is like Naphtali. But also Issachar, he submits to the burden of God, and he goes off to do his other labors. So Moses, again, has the scene with the burning bush after his affair with Zipporah and the birth of Gershom, that he's probably unclean. And then the scene is Moses, he's performing a burnt sacrifice for forgiveness from Yahweh, right? He's unclean, he's trying to purify himself. And then, again, Hephaestus, or an analogous Naphtali, and then you have Issachar, right? Together they're like this burning bush. That Hephaestus comes out in book 21 of the Iliad, and he burns like all these trees, and he boils the river. And then at the end you have Artemis. She's there at the end too in book 21, and she's in the mix of it too. And then also in Exodus, the tribe of Dan and the tribe of Judah build the tabernacle. So Heracles he's like joining the tribe of Dan and Judah. And then where Heraclean is like Dan, the snake, the serpent, and then he's like the lion of Judah, right? Where Dan is like Hera, and then the lion is like Judah, right? But perhaps that's too much analysis.